The tip of Carol's metal tape measure pressed against the cool, gray surface of the topmost stone. 37 inches, she announced, her voice not directed at Arthur, but rather broadcast for the benefit of Mr. Henderson, who was dutifully watering his immaculate lawn across the street. That's a full 13 inches into the common area view corridor. She clicked a ballpoint pen with a sharp, definitive sound and made a neat, precise note on the form attached to her clipboard. Her smile was as tidy and regulated as the violation she was documenting. Arthur stood beside his creation, a two-tiered raised garden bed built from stacked flagstone, his hands dusty with soil and grit. It was the first thing he had built, truly built with his own two hands in years. "Carol, we've been over this," Arthur said, his voice calm and even, a skill he had perfected during the long months of his wife Lena's recovery. "My property survey shows my lot line extends another 2 feet. The garden is well within my property." "Your survey," Carol said, emphasizing the word as if it were a quaint, irrelevant artifact. "Maybe what the bank uses, but the association's governing documents are what matter here. And covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Section 8.4.2 is very clear about encroachments on common areas, especially designated view corridors." She tapped the clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. "I'm sure it was an honest mistake, Arthur. But rules are rules. They're what keep our community property values high." Mr. Henderson had stopped watering his lawn and was now openly watching, his hose limp in his hand. Arthur felt a familiar tightening in his chest. This wasn't about property values. It was about power. Carol, as the long-serving head of the Summit Creek Architectural Control Committee, wielded her clipboard and tape measure like a scepter. "It's not a common area, Carol. It's a utility easement," Arthur countered, keeping his tone conversational. "There's a difference." "A distinction without a difference, according to the ACC's interpretation," she replied smoothly, already turning to leave. "You'll receive a courtesy notice from the management company by the end of the day. It will explain the remediation process. You have 14 days. She paused on the sidewalk and gave him another of her thin, controlled smiles. "It's a lovely structure. Really. It's just in the wrong place." With that, she strode away, her posture ramrod straight, leaving Arthur standing beside the physical manifestation of his hope, now branded as a violation. He looked at the garden bed, at the fresh bags of organic soil waiting to be poured, at the small terracotta pots holding the tomato and basil seedlings Lena had so carefully chosen. This wasn't just stone and dirt. It was his quiet declaration that the worst was behind them, a monument to their new beginning in a place they had chosen for its tranquility. And now, that tranquility was being measured, documented, and found non-compliant. 2 years earlier, the world had shrunk to the 4 walls of a hospital room. Arthur had spent months navigating the sterile corridors, the hushed conversations with doctors, and the relentless beeping of machines that tethered his wife, Lena, to life. When she finally came home, frail but determined, their cramped city apartment felt less like a refuge and more like a cage. The noise, the lack of green space, the constant reminders of a life interrupted it all weighed on them. Their move to Summit Creek was a deliberate escape. It was a sprawling, master-planned community of neatly manicured lawns, winding cul-de-sacs, and a thick binder of rules designed to preserve a specific brand of suburban harmony. They had spent an entire evening after closing, sitting on the floor of their empty new house, flipping through that binder. Lena, a librarian by trade and a researcher by nature, had paused, tracing a line of text with her finger. CC&Rs, Section 8.4.2, no structure, planting, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain upon any lot which encroaches upon any easement, right of way, or any area designated as common area. She had looked up at him, her brow furrowed with a flicker of old anxiety. This seems intense. Arthur, ever the optimist, had leaned over and pointed to a different section he had already highlighted. Look here, though. Section 5.7. Utility easements. It just says the utility companies have the right to access, service, and install equipment. It doesn't say we can't use the space. It's still our property. We just can't build a permanent foundation on it. He tapped the page. This garden bed is stacked stone. No mortar. No foundation. If the gas company needs to dig a trench, I can have it moved in a day. It's fine. He had reassured her then, and he had believed it. The garden was for her. It was a tangible project, a way to cultivate life after so much time spent fearing its loss. He'd spent weeks researching, sketching plans, and sourcing the stone. The physical labor was a balm. Each stone he lifted and placed a small victory against the lingering helplessness he'd felt at her bedside. When it was finished, standing 3 feet high and curving gently along the edge of their yard, Lena had come outside and laid a hand on the sun-warmed stone. Her smile the first truly unburdened one he'd seen in years. That was all the approval he had needed. He hadn't bothered submitting a formal application to the ACC. The CC&Rs stated that landscaping features under 4 feet in height that didn't involve permanent foundations were generally considered pre-approved. He had read the rules. He thought he understood them. He hadn't accounted for Carol. He had seen her in action once before. At the quarterly HOA board meeting, they had dutifully attended a month after moving in. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with beige folding chairs and a faint smell of chlorine from the nearby pool. Carol, presenting the ACC report, spoke for 20 minutes with unwavering precision. She detailed a violation for unapproved holiday decorations left up 3 days past the January 15th deadline, a citation for a basketball hoop whose net was a non-compliant shade of orange, and a formal warning for a resident whose trash receptacles were visible from the street for more than 4 hours after pickup. She was meticulous, impersonal, and utterly convinced of her own righteousness. The board, a panel of 5 weary-looking homeowners, had nodded along and approved her report without comment. At the time, Arthur had found it vaguely amusing. Now, he was the subject of that same dispassionate, procedural zeal. The courtesy notice arrived in his inbox at 4:52 p.m. As promised, it was polite, professional, and chillingly firm. The email was from Summit Creek Management Services, but Arthur knew it was written in the key of Carol. Subject: Courtesy Notice, CC&R Violation, Lot 74. Dear Mr. Miller, this letter serves as a courtesy notice regarding a potential violation of the Summit Creek Homeowners Association's governing documents. During a routine community inspection, a member of the Architectural Control Committee ACC observed an unapproved hardscape installation, raised stone garden bed on your property at 128 Blossom Court. The structure appears to encroach upon a designated common area view corridor, in potential violation of CC&Rs, Forever 8.4.2, encroachments on common areas. A diagram of the affected area is attached for your reference. We kindly request that you remediate this violation by removing the structure within 14 days from the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in the issuance of a formal violation notice, which may include monetary fines as outlined in the association's fine and enforcement policy. We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining the aesthetic standards of our community. Sincerely, Summit Creek Management. Arthur clicked open the attachment. It was a blurry, photocopied diagram of his lot, with a thick red line crudely drawn across the corner of his property. The area behind the line was labeled View Corridor. It looked less like an official document and more like something Carol had sketched herself. He felt a surge of indignation, but he pushed it down, replacing it with methodical resolve. He would not be emotional. He would be factual. He spent an hour drafting a polite, detailed response. He attached a high-resolution PDF of the official property survey from their closing documents. Highlighting his property line, he included photographs of the garden bed from multiple angles, demonstrating its placement. He quoted Section 5.7 regarding utility easements and explained, respectfully, that the ACC's interpretation of a view corridor did not appear to be supported by the legally filed plat map. He concluded by stating his belief that he was in full compliance and that no remediation was necessary. He hit send and felt a sense of cautious optimism. It was a simple misunderstanding, and his evidence was clear. A week passed in silence. The seedlings in their pots on the patio were growing taller, their leaves reaching for the sun. Lena had started to look at the empty garden bed with a touch of sadness. Maybe we should just move it. Art, she said one evening. It's not worth the stress. No, he said, his voice firmer than he intended. It's the principle of the thing. Lena, it's our property. We can't let a committee bully us into giving it up because of a rule they invented. The fight was no longer just about the garden. It was about defending the peaceful sanctuary they had sought. The following Tuesday, the mail carrier knocked on their door. He held a certified letter and a digital stylus. Need a signature for this one. Mr. Miller. Arthur's stomach tightened as he signed. The envelope was from a local law firm, the one the HOA management company kept on retainer. Inside, the tone was no longer courteous. It was a formal violation notice. The language was dense with legal jargon, but the message was unmistakable. His appeal had been denied. A $100 fine had been levied, and a further fine of $25 per day would be added until the violation was corrected. He had 14 days to remove the garden bed, after which the board would be entitled to all available remedies, including, but not limited to, placing a lien on the property. The threat was no longer abstract. It was on official letterhead, delivered by certified mail. They were threatening his home. The letter felt like a physical blow. The polite corporate veil of the management company had been lifted, revealing the unyielding legal machinery beneath. Lena read it over his shoulder, her hand resting on his arm. A lien over a garden bed. This is insane. Arthur's first instinct was to call the management company and demand an explanation, but he knew that would be fruitless. A phone call was not a document. A conversation was not evidence. He had to stick to the process. He spent another evening crafting an email, this time more forceful. He reiterated his points, cited the specific documents he had provided, and formally requested all materials the ACC had used to make its determination, including any official map defining the view corridor. The response came 2 days later. It was breathtaking in its dismissiveness. Subject: RE Formal Violation Notice, Lot 74. Dear Mr. Miller, this is to acknowledge receipt of your correspondence. The decision of the Architectural Control Committee is based on the governing documents and the established community standards. As such, the decision is considered final. The violation stands, and the associated fines are accumulating as per the notice. Your compliance is required by the specified deadline. Information regarding the hearing and appeals process can be found in the community bylaws. Section 11.3. Sincerely, Summit Creek Management. It was a bureaucratic brick wall. They hadn't addressed a single one of his points. They hadn't provided their evidence. They had simply stated that their decision was final, because they had decided it was final. The email was a masterclass in corporate non-communication, designed to frustrate, intimidate, and exhaust the recipient into compliance. For a moment, Arthur felt a wave of despair. He looked out the window at the garden bed. It would take him half a day to dismantle it. They could pay the $100 fine. They could just give in. And the problem would disappear. Mr. Gable, their elderly next-door neighbor, had advised as much a year ago. Carol had cited him for a bird feeder that was, according to her measurements, 6 inches too tall. I just took it down. Arthur, Mr. Gable had said, shrugging, it's easier than fighting them. You can't win. Lena saw the look on his face. She took the letter from his hand and placed it on the counter. No, she said softly, but with a steel edge to her voice that he hadn't heard since the depths of her illness. They're counting on you giving up. They're counting on it being easier to comply than to fight. Don't let them be right. She was right. This was a war of attrition, and they had just lost the first skirmish. But it wasn't over. He looked at the email again, at the reference to the bylaws. Section 11.3, Hearing and Appeals Process. It was a door they had left open, perhaps assuming no one would have the tenacity to walk through it. Okay, he said, his resolve hardening. Let's see what Section 11.3 has to say. He wasn't just going to request a hearing. He was going to prepare for one as if it were a legal battle for his home. Because, he now realized, it was. Arthur's first call was to David, Lena's younger brother. David was a paralegal at a downtown commercial real estate firm, a man who lived and breathed contracts, deeds, and zoning ordinances. His mind worked like a search engine, finding loopholes and precedents where others saw only dense blocks of text. An HOA dispute, David said over the phone, a note of grim amusement in his voice. Art. That's the legal equivalent of a land war in Asia. The house always wins. Not this time, Arthur said. They're wrong. David, I've read the documents. Their case is built on a view corridor that doesn't seem to officially exist. There was a pause, and Arthur could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. Okay. I'm intrigued, David said. Send me everything you have. The CC&Rs, the bylaws, the violation notices, your survey, the blurry map they sent you. Everything. Within an hour, Arthur had scanned and emailed a complete digital file. That evening, David called back. Okay, I've got it, David began, his voice all business. First, you need to formally request a hearing with the board of directors. Do it in writing, certified mail, return receipt requested, cite bylaw 11.3. That starts the clock on their end. They have to grant you a hearing within 30 days. Done, Arthur said, already drafting the letter. Good. Now, about this view corridor. David continued. You're right to be suspicious. That map they sent you is garbage. It has no surveyor's seal, no date, no file number. It's legally meaningless. The only map that matters is the official plat map filed with the county recorder's office when the subdivision was created. That is the legally binding document that defines every lot, easement, and common area. How do I get that? Arthur asked. You don't? I do, David said. I'll head down to the county records office tomorrow. I'll pull the original plat for Summit Creek. If that corridor isn't on there, their entire case evaporates. The next afternoon, David sent him a file. It was a crystal clear, high-resolution scan of the official Summit Creek plat map, covered in official stamps and signatures. David had highlighted Arthur's lot, The 10-foot wide strip at the edge of his property was clearly marked with a dashed line, and inside that dashed line were the letters UE. UE, David explained in the email. Utility easement. Just like you said, it's designated for use by the electric, gas, and cable companies. There is absolutely no mention of a view corridor anywhere on this official, legally binding document. The HOA's map is a fiction they created for their own convenience. A wave of triumph washed over Arthur. This was it. This was the silver bullet. He had irrefutable proof. But David's email continued. This is great, but don't celebrate yet. An HOA board can be a kangaroo court. They can ignore evidence if they want. We need more. We need to know why they're so invested in this. Why is Carol so obsessed with this specific piece of land? That question led them to the HOA's online portal for residents. A clunky website with an archive of official documents, including years of board meeting minutes. For 2 nights, Arthur and David combed through the PDFs, searching for any mention of view corridor, easement, or Section 8.4.2. It was a tedious, mind-numbing task. Then, David found it. Art, you need to see this, David said, his voice tense over the phone. He had just sent Arthur a link to a specific PDF. Go to page 14, ACC report from the meeting on June 12th, 3 years ago. Arthur opened the file. It was a scanned copy of the meeting minutes. On page 14, under the Architectural Control Committee report, was a short paragraph. The committee reviewed and denied the application for a deck extension submitted by the owner of Lot 12. The proposed extension was found to encroach by 24 inches upon the common area view corridor easement, in violation of Figure 8.4.2. A discussion was held regarding the historical precedent and legal standing of the easement designation. The details of this discussion are summarized in Addendum B. Then, Arthur saw the next line. Addendum B has been redacted pending legal review. Below that, the rest of the page was a solid black box. Redacted, Arthur said. Why would they redact meeting minutes? Exactly, David replied, the excitement rising in his voice. HOAs are required by law in this state to maintain open records, with very few exceptions like pending litigation or employee matters. Redacting something like this is a huge red flag. It means they're hiding something. Now, for the million-dollar question, who owns Lot 12? Arthur's blood ran cold. He already knew the answer. He pulled up the community directory from the same online portal. He scrolled down the list of addresses and lot numbers. Lot 12, 119, Blossom Court, Carol Peterson. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. This was never about a rule. It was never about property values or aesthetic harmony. 3 years ago, Carol, the high priestess of the CC&Rs, had wanted to build a deck. The board, perhaps a different board than the current one, had denied her, using the very same view corridor justification she was now using against him. The redacted minutes likely contained a report or a legal opinion that questioned the validity of that designation, a discussion the board wanted to bury. Carol's fanatical enforcement wasn't about principle. It was about a bitter, personal vendetta. She was consumed by a toxic form of fairness, if I couldn't have it. No one can. His garden bed, built on the exact same type of easement she had been denied, was a personal affront to her. He wasn't just a rule breaker. He was a symbol of a defeat she had never accepted. She's not just enforcing a rule, David, Arthur said slowly, staring at the blacked-out text on his screen. She's settling a score. And she's using the full power of the HOA to do it. David finished. This changes everything. This isn't just a dispute over a garden. This is an abuse of power. And those redacted minutes are the key. The fight had just become deeply personal. Arthur now had the proof, and he had the motive. But getting a chance to present it would be his biggest challenge yet. The formal notice for his hearing arrived a week later. It was scheduled during the HOA's next quarterly meeting, 2 weeks away. Arthur felt a surge of adrenaline. This was his chance to present his case in front of the entire board and any residents who chose to attend. Then he read the fine print. As per the association's policies for public comment and dispute resolution, you will be allotted a total of 5 minutes to present your case to the board. The board's decision will be rendered at a later date. 5 minutes. Arthur stared at the words in disbelief. He had weeks of research, multiple legal documents, a complex backstory about redacted minutes, and a trail of procedural abuse to lay out. How could he possibly explain all of that in 300 seconds? The time limit was not a matter of procedure. It was a weapon. It was designed to make a coherent defense impossible, to reduce his carefully constructed case to a frantic, jumbled plea. Lena put a calming hand on his shoulder. "Okay," she said, her librarian's mind immediately shifting into organizational mode. 5 minutes is all we have, so every second has to count. We'll structure it. We'll rehearse it. We'll time it. We'll treat it like a presentation, not a speech. Their next move was to try and get ahead of the time limit. Arthur, with David's help, compiled a comprehensive evidence packet. It contained the formal violation notices, his correspondence with the management company, a side-by-side comparison of the HOA's blurry map and the official county plat map, a detailed analysis of the relevant CC&R and bylaw sections, and a formal request for the unredacted minutes from the June 2021 meeting regarding Lot 12. It was a professional, undeniable case presented in a 20-page document. He sent the packet via email to the management company, respectfully requesting that it be distributed to the board members for their review prior to the hearing. It seemed like a reasonable, good faith gesture. The denial came back within the hour. "Mr. Miller, receipt of your packet is acknowledged. However, the board does not review evidence or materials related to a hearing in advance. All presentations must be made orally during the allotted time at the meeting itself. This is standard procedure to ensure fairness and consistency for all parties. Sincerely, Summit Creek Management." Arthur felt a cold fury. Standard procedure. Fairness, he said to Lena. Pacing their kitchen. They're deliberately walking into that hearing uninformed. They're making it impossible for me to present the facts. They're not interested in the truth. They just want this to be over. The system was rigged. The obstacles weren't accidental. They were features, designed to wear him down. He was an introvert who dreaded public speaking, and they were forcing him into a high-stakes, timed performance in a public forum. They had denied him the ability to prepare the judges for the evidence they were about to see. He would have to build his case from scratch, against a ticking clock, in front of a board that was already predisposed to rule against him. The garden bed seemed a million miles away. This was now a test of his nerve, his preparation, and his ability to command a room that wanted nothing more than for him to sit down and be quiet. For the next 2 weeks, their dining room became a command center. Lena acted as the board, peppering him with questions and holding up a stopwatch. They distilled his 20-page packet into a 5-minute script, broken into 4 key points, each supported by a large, clear visual aid he would present. He practiced it until he could recite it in his sleep. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but he also knew the facts were on his side. If he could just get through those 5 minutes, the truth would be undeniable. The community clubhouse was exactly as Arthur remembered it. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and the lingering scent of disinfectant. About 20 residents were scattered among the folding chairs, their expressions ranging from bored to curious. At the front of the room, behind a long folding table, sat the 5 members of the board of directors. In the center sat the president, a man named Tom, who ran a local insurance agency. To his right sat Carol Peterson, her hands folded neatly on top of her ACC binder, her expression placid and unreadable. A large projector screen hung behind them. On it was the meeting agenda, and, in the top right corner, a digital timer, currently displaying 05 Y0. The meeting began with monotonous procedural matters: the approval of the previous meeting's minutes, the treasurer's report. Then, Tom looked at his agenda. Next, we have the report from the Architectural Control Committee. Carol. Carol stood and walked to the small lectern at the side of the table. She spoke in her usual crisp, measured tones, detailing minor infractions and approvals. Then, her gaze drifted for a moment to Mr. Gable, who was sitting in the front row. Finally, Carol said, the committee has issued a new violation notice for Lot 72. The owner, Mr. Gable, has installed a bird bath that is situated 1 inch too close to his side property line. A de minimis, but clear violation of Rule 9.1.4 regarding setbacks for yard ornaments. A fine of $50 has been recommended. Arthur saw Mr. Gable flinch. The timing was no coincidence. It was a petty, vindictive jab, a reminder to everyone in the room of Carol's power and her willingness to use it over the most trivial of matters. She was taking a hostage before his hearing even began. "Thank you, Carol," Tom said, making a note. "Now, we move to the homeowner hearing for the violation on Lot 74. Mr. Miller, you have 5 minutes to address the board." Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He felt a steady, rhythmic pulse in his temples. He took a deep breath, picked up his folder of visual aids, and walked to the lectern. He nodded to the board, his eyes briefly meeting Carol's. Her expression was one of mild, professional interest, as if she were about to listen to a weather report. Tom hit a button, and the timer on the screen behind him began its silent, relentless countdown. Row 4:59, row 4:58. "Good evening, members of the board," Arthur began, his voice surprisingly steady. "My name is Arthur Miller, from 128 Blossom Court. I am here to appeal Violation Notice 2023-74. I will demonstrate, with official documents, that no violation has occurred." He placed his first visual aid on an easel beside the lectern, the blurry, red-lined map the HOA had sent him. Point 1. The basis for this violation is a document with no legal authority. This is the map I was provided. It is an undated, unsealed sketch. It purports to show a view corridor. However, the legally binding document for our community is the official plat map, on file with the county. He swapped the first image for the second, the clear, stamped, and sealed county plat map. He pointed to the highlighted section, EO4-10. Point 2. The official plat map does not define a view corridor. As you can see, the area in question is designated with the letters UE for utility easement. This is a critical legal distinction, which brings me to my third point. He turned to a new visual aid, a large print copy of 2 sections from the CC&Rs. 03-25. Point 3. The board is misapplying its own governing documents. You have cited Section 8.4.2 regarding encroachments on common areas. However, Section 5.7 defines this utility easement. Its sole purpose is to grant access to utility companies. It is not a common area. The ACC has no jurisdiction to enforce aesthetic standards within a utility easement. only to ensure that access is not permanently blocked. My garden bed, a non-permanent structure, does not block that access. The room was silent. The board members were leaning forward, looking from his evidence to their own binders. Carol's placid expression had not changed, but her hands were now gripping her pen tightly. This leads to the final, and most important, point, Arthur said, his voice dropping slightly. This is not the first time this specific issue has come before this board. O2-0. He put up his final visual aid, a printout of the redacted meeting minutes. On June 12th, 3 years ago, the board denied a building application for Lot 12, citing this same non-existent view corridor. The minutes of that meeting state that a discussion was held regarding the legal standing of the easement designation. But the details of that discussion have been redacted. He looked directly at the board president. I am formally requesting, as a homeowner in good standing, that this board release the unredacted minutes and the associated Addendum B. That document contains a precedent directly relevant to my case, and I believe it will show that the board has been aware for years that the view corridor designation is legally unenforceable. Yo 110. He had not mentioned Carol's name. He hadn't accused her of a vendetta. He had simply presented the facts and used the board's own procedures to corner them. To continue to fine him, they would have to ignore the county's legal documents and keep their own records secret. He took a breath and summed up. The evidence is clear. The violation is based on an unofficial map, a misinterpretation of the CC&Rs, and it ignores a legal precedent the board has actively concealed. My property is in compliance. Therefore, I respectfully request that the board vote to immediately dismiss this violation and waive all associated fines. He glanced at the timer. Z032. He was finished. He could sit down. But then he saw Mr. Gable, watching him with a look of desperate hope. He saw Lena in the audience, giving him a small, encouraging nod. With my remaining time, Arthur added, his voice ringing with a new authority, I would also like to make a motion for the board to formally approve Mr. Gable's birdbath on Lot 72 as a de minimis exception, in the spirit of building community, rather than litigating it down to the inch. The timer hit 0. Arthur stepped back from the lectern, his work done. The silence in the room was absolute. The 5 board members stared at the evidence on the easel. Tom, the president, cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable. He whispered something to the woman next to him, who shook her head. He then leaned over and spoke to Carol. Arthur couldn't hear the words, but he saw Carol's jaw tighten. She gave a short, sharp shake of her head. The silence stretched. Finally, a board member on the far end, a retired accountant named Frank, spoke up. Mr. President, he said, his voice clear and resonant in the quiet room. I don't see how we can proceed with this fine. The evidence Mr. Miller has presented is compelling. The county plat map is a legal document. Our map is not. Tom sighed, running a hand over his face. Frank, this is a matter for the board to discuss in executive session. With all due respect, Tom, this is a matter of public record, Frank countered, and Mr. Miller's request to see the unredacted minutes from 2021 is a valid one. I, for one, would like to see them. Before Tom could respond, a new voice emerged from the audience. It was Mr. Gable, who was slowly getting to his feet, his hands trembling slightly. I'd like to say something, he said, his voice frail but determined. I've lived here for 20 years. I've paid my dues on time, every time. And for 20 years, I've watched this ACC, Under Ms. Peterson's leadership, hand out fines for things that don't matter. A holiday wreath left up a day too long. A garden hose not coiled properly. A bird bath that's an inch off. We're also afraid of getting a letter in the mail that we've stopped feeling like neighbors. We just feel policed. He looked at Carol, his expression not angry, but sad. Carol, we all know what this is about. Your deck. It's time to let it go. A flicker of something pain. Humiliation crossed Carol's face before her expression hardened back into an impenetrable mask. A murmur went through the crowd. Another hand went up, then another. A woman stood. Mr. Gable is right. My kids were given a warning for drawing on our own driveway with sidewalk chalk. The meeting had devolved from a hearing into a referendum. Tom, seeing he had lost control of the room, banged a small gavel on the table. Order, order. The board will take this under advisement. We will table the violation for Lot 74, pending a review of the documents. He looked exhausted. And we will waive the fine for Lot 72. It was a victory, if a messy, incomplete one. As the meeting broke up into small, buzzing groups of residents, Arthur and Lena slipped out in the cool night air. Lena took his hand. You were amazing, she whispered. Arthur felt a profound sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. He had won the battle. But the system that allowed it to happen was still in place. It wasn't over yet. He had exposed a crack in the foundation. And now, the whole community was looking at it, wondering how deep it went. A week later, a plain white envelope from Summit Creek Management arrived in their mailbox. There was no certified mail sticker this time. Inside was a brief, formally worded letter stating that Violation Notice 2023-74 had been dismissed and all associated fines and fees had been reversed. There was no apology, no explanation. It was a sterile, face-saving conclusion. The community, however, was not so quiet. Spurred on by Arthur's stand and Mr. Gable's speech, a group of homeowners had formally petitioned for a special meeting to review the ACC's procedures and budget. The board, facing a potential revolt, had no choice but to agree. The unredacted minutes from the 2021 meeting were quietly uploaded to the resident portal. They revealed a legal opinion solicited by the HOA's own lawyers, which stated unequivocally that the view corridor was an informal designation with no legal basis for enforcement on private property easements. The board at the time had voted to bury the report and continue enforcement. The fallout was swift. Carol resigned from the ACC, effective immediately. The board issued a formal censure against her and the two other current members who had been serving at the time of the 2021 decision. They also announced an independent, third-party audit of the ACC's past 5 years of violations and fines. Arthur and Lena finally filled their garden bed with soil and planted the seedlings. As he watched Lena gently pat the earth around a young basil plant, Arthur felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. They had their piece. The final piece of the puzzle arrived a few days later, in the form of a phone call from David. "You're not going to believe this," David said, his voice buzzing with the thrill of discovery. "I couldn't let it go. I was wondering why the management company was so complicit in all this. Why they would stonewall you when the evidence was so clearly on your side. It wasn't just about keeping a client happy." "What did you find?" Arthur asked. "The management company has a list of approved contractors they recommend to residents for remediation work: painters to fix non-compliant trim color, landscapers to remove unapproved plants, and so on. I did a little digging into the corporate filings of those contractors. The owner of the management company is listed as a silent partner in 3 of them. They weren't just enforcing rules. Art. They were creating business opportunities for themselves. Every fine they levied, every demand for remediation, was a potential referral fee. It was a racket. Arthur leaned against the kitchen counter, stunned. It was the missing link. The rational, financial motive that explained the irrational, unyielding bureaucracy. They hadn't backed Carol because she was right. They backed her because her zealousness was profitable. That evening, Arthur sat at his computer. He was no longer just a resident. He was a catalyst. He began drafting a proposal. It was a new bylaw amendment establishing a transparent, competitive bidding process for all HOA-mandated work, and an independent homeowner oversight committee to review any fine exceeding a nominal amount. He knew the board, humbled and under scrutiny, would have to consider it. He looked out the window at his garden. The stones, which had once been a symbol of defiance, now looked like a simple, beautiful part of his home. He hadn't just won the right to keep his garden. He had helped his neighbors reclaim a piece of their community. He and Lena had come to Summit Creek seeking peace. And, in the end, they had found it not by avoiding conflict, but by facing it with quiet, unyielding integrity.